You're not always going to have the lowest cost of capital. But if you can have really in-depth conversations with airlines and I think become more of a resource to them, it will help position you ultimately for success.
This is the Time on Wing podcast. Welcome back. I'm Courtney Miller with Visual Approach Analytics. With me, as always, Garrick Deschavon of Collateral Verifications. Garrick, who are we talking to today?
Today, we are chatting with a good friend of ours, Mr. Brian Rynott. Let's go back through his background a little bit. We kind of touched on it last time, so for those of you that have forgotten. So Brian is currently SVP Marketing for Altavair. Prior to that, he was a director at Rynott Capital Partners. He was also Managing Director for American Aviation Consultancy. He was Chief Investment Officer at Intrepid Aviation. And prior to that, he was VP of Risk Management at AWAS. He has also had a stint where actually I met him for the first time. Was a Senior Manager, Global Airline Strategy at American Express. And he was also Senior Analyst, Revenue Management for American Airlines. And he has gotten a Bachelor of Science in Hospitality Management from the Florida International University, and an MBA from Rynott. So he's one of us. But in any case, Brian, this is your time on wing.
Just a quick intermission before we continue with the show. We do get a lot of questions about how our listeners can support the show, and frankly, the easiest way is to continue the spirit of the show, which is just to reach out to us at conferences. But we also run businesses as well, and you can support us by supporting a lot of the work that we do. You can support the work that I do through Visual Approach by visiting visualapproach.io, where we produce a lot of research and analysis, a lot of data visualizations.
From my side, obviously, I focus more on metals, so anything that's aircraft related, if you're looking for valuations, whether it's on aircraft engines, I'm happy to help with any of those types of projects. So we appreciate certainly the opportunities to work with all of you. And we certainly also appreciate just the fact that people are willing to listen to what we have to say and enjoy kind of our thoughts and takes on what we think is a fascinating industry. So thank you.
Okay, back to the show.
So Brian, thank you for agreeing to speak with us today. Obviously, we had a lot of fun when you were going after us. And so now we get a chance to go after you. Got a load of questions. We got a bunch of guests we're going to introduce, long lost girlfriends, bosses,
Good.
You name it.
Good.
Good. There's a line. It's going to be awesome.
Payback, I think. Yeah. Guys are such good friends.
Yeah, we try.
That.
We try.
Yeah.
No, so we're definitely excited to kind of get you on a one-on-one or one-on-two, and kind of get your take on a little bit more in more detail in terms of your background and how you got to where you are today. But as we do with all of our guests, let's hear about that, right? Let's hear about kind of what got you going in the industry and how let's talk through your path of where you are today. But the passion is definitely the interesting part. Because you definitely love the industry and everybody knows you as somebody that loves the industry. So let's hear it.
Yeah, no, look, thanks guys again for having me and great to be on here and being able to speak with you again this time around, as you say, the proverbial tables turned. Look, I think I like to say that I was kind of born into the aviation industry. I had wonderful parents, that work for United Airlines. They spent their entire careers with United Airlines, 46 and 44 years respectively.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, kind of from birth, I was born into the airline business and had the advantage of being able to travel non-rev and go on some, really exceptional vacations growing up. And I caught the aviation bug at an early age. And I remember my dad, I think I was in middle school at the time, came home and he had brought me a copy of Air Transport World. And it was the first I'd gotten Airliners magazine as an enthusiast back then, but it was the first time I'd really seen a business magazine. And I just voraciously consumed it. It wrote to the editor, kind of, was able to get a subscription. And I just loved reading anything I could get my hands on at that time, going to the library and looking at like OAG timetables. And I used to hound my parents to bring me to the airport. So my dad worked primarily in human resources functions for a lot of his career, especially when I was growing up at United Airlines, and my mom worked in customer service at O'Hare. And so I would have my dad bring me to O'Hare when my mom was working like on a weekend, and I'd go around and collect different timetables from the airlines and do airplane spotting and take pictures. And, really it just enjoyed it and loved the industry and read books and as much as I could. And I used to, write letters to the airlines over the summers to see what information I could get from them, either press kits or pictures, timetables, what have you. So it was a definitely an interest from a young age and something, you can't fake it. Like it was absolutely genuine and continues to this day. I had a bit of a pivot in high school where when I was deciding what I wanted to do in college and where I wanted to go, I didn't think at that point in time that I wanted to necessarily work at United Airlines and follow in my parents' footsteps. At the same time, I wasn't really enthralled with the winters of suburban Chicago. And so, looked at options to go to a warm weather destination, ended up applying to hospitality management school and found another passion in the restaurant and hotel/resort business. And really loved it. So I spent in my undergraduate years down in Miami, learning that side of the business, and really with the intention when I graduated of working in the restaurant or ideally for a hotel and a resort in a warm weather destination. But the aviation bug, it still followed me. And, being in Miami was a great place to do aircraft spotting. You had all these Latin American carriers, and at the time, this is before a lot of the industry had really consolidated in a meaningful way. It was just a great place to be. And I remember reading the Miami Herald and Latin Trade Magazine and some of the other publications and seeing this gentleman by the name of Bobby Booth quoted a lot, who ran a small advisory firm called Avman, or Aviation Management Associates. And he was also the creator of the Latin Pass frequent flyer program. So this is in the era really before global alliances, when you had some of these smaller carriers that created and pooled their loyalty programs together to compete against the likes of American Airlines at that point in particular out of Miami. So I wrote him a letter, expressed my interest in learning more about aviation, in particular in Latin America. And, much to my surprise, he wrote me back and he said, look, why don't you come to our office, spend a day with us, meet me, meet some of the other principals of the firm, see if you like it, what you think. And I did just that. And what turned out to be kind of like an informal conversation and meeting, and really him being very generous to, I guess, a 19-year-old at that time, ended up becoming like a 3-year internship that I was able to work with him and his company and learn, even more about the airline business and the airline business in particular to Latin America. And he was incredibly thoughtful, bringing me on engagements down to Brazil. They did an engagement for South African Airways. We went to Argentina, Chile, Mexico, Central America. So phenomenal experience at a young age.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And then it came time to really think about what I was going to do when I graduated. And I had a friend of mine who's like, look, you should really consider American Airlines. They have this great management training program. And of course, I knew American well by that point, and in particular, given their large presence in Miami and what's called the MCLA, or was called the MCLA division, Miami, Caribbean, and Latin America, run by a gentleman by the name of Peter Delara. And so I put in for the American management training, undergraduate management training program, and was extended a job offer, joined them in May of 1999 in revenue management and international markets. So moved from Miami to Dallas. And it's a rotational program. So every year you would kind of switch jobs. So in my 4 years, I had progressive roles within the revenue management group. I also was a volunteer on American's accident team. So in 2001, I was activated in both response to 9/11, and then about 2 months after 9/11, there was Flight 587, which was an A300 that crashed on takeoff out of JFK going to Santo Domingo. So, in addition to the business side, I had a real world experience at assisting people in a time of need, and also a time where our country was going through an incredible amount of change as a result. So exceptional experiences at a really young age. And American Airlines is a phenomenal organization to teach, I think, how to think about business problems, how to craft business problems and solutions and present. And really some of the best managers I've had in my life, including to this day, the one I consider the best manager I've ever worked for, all were at American Airlines. And I think that goes a lot to the talent that they would recruit at the time, the people they brought in, the systems, and just the training that they had in place. It was a phenomenal experience. But fast forward post 9/11, American had gone through a lot of change. We had the Rynott Air acquisition, Business Express, which was a regional airline acquisition, the TWA acquisition. I worked heavily on the TWA acquisition for about a year. And my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, also worked for American Airlines. My parents were still at United, seeing United at that point in Chapter 11 and what they were going through and kind of where American was. Maybe an early purview to my risk management background to be developed. So, we both can't be tied to a single employer, let alone an airline. And so I started looking for roles in New York, where she was based, and ultimately found an opportunity with American Express, the credit card company, to join. They had a very small advisory and consulting group, and it later became called Airline Center of Excellence, which was a way for American Express to help identify airlines that, were impacted by what was going on in the world at that time, but would ultimately be long-term survivors. Because so much of Amex's
Can I
charge
suggest
volume,
Delta?
it's as one example. Indeed, Delta was one. Amex participated in the DIP facility when they filed for Chapter 11, but they weren't the only one. So it was a great experience to work for an airline or a company outside of the airline, but that was involved with airlines, but also really a framework of how do you see the industry evolving, right? Consolidation, which at that point had really just started between America West and US Airways. How do you think through and pick, who will be the long-term winners in this industry? So there was just a lot of opportunity in those 5 years that I had spent with Amex and in getting to think through, again, business problems and solutions, but really focused on an airline and aviation angle. After Amex, I had been approached when I was with American Express by a recruiter who was looking for a risk management role for AWAS. And AWAS at the time was an aircraft leasing company. It's now owned by DAE. But they had been sold by Morgan Stanley to Terra Firma, a UK private equity firm. Terra Firma had also acquired Pegasus, and they were relocating their headquarters from Sydney and Seattle and San Francisco to Dublin. So we went through the recruitment process. We flew over to Dublin, took a visit of the city, and we decided, it'd be an incredible opportunity with a young family to spend some time in Europe. Moved to Dublin, took on that role, and spent 4 years with AWAS in risk management, covering a couple of different regions. And that really ignited my passion. Like, getting into aircraft leasing was something that had been an interest of mine for a while. It just wasn't clear what the career path was to get into that industry at that point. And being able to work with really a variety of airlines, both large passenger airlines, smaller passenger airlines, cargo airlines, I covered the Americas, so I got to travel, fairly extensively across the region, Southern Europe, all the way to Armenia. It was an incredible opportunity. And really there you're looking at helping AWAS identify known risks to airline counterparties. How do you structure deals around that? How do you take commercial views that would help structure deals around that? And it was a fascinating opportunity. The business grew exceptionally during that time. And one of the CEOs of AWAS who brought me over when I first started had moved back to the US and invited me to be part of the senior management team of Intrepid Aviation, which he was reconstituting from a business strategy and management team perspective, relocating the headquarters to Stamford, Connecticut. So we moved back to the US. I became chief investment officer there and really turned the business from what was going to be an A330 factory freighter lessor into a passenger lessor, initially very much focused on wide-body aircraft. And so we worked, extensively on pivoting from the freighter asset to the passenger asset and placement, new management team, new strategy. We were owned by a private equity firm. We brought in a secondary private equity firm as a sponsor to that business to help fund the growth. Ultimately, the plan was to... Okay, hold on. My
wife's home.
wife's coming. Hold on. Come on.
Mom's home.
Mom's home.
Who has the vacuum? Is that you, Garrick?
No, because I'm on mute.
No, that's the leaf. That's the leaf blower. Sorry.
The leaf blower.
That's
So
the guy.
it's
So glad
like
I'm not the only one.
Backwards vacuum. It's fine.
Is it too loud?
No.
They'll be done relatively soon.
No, it's no problem. So I want to know.
Yeah.
Okay. So AWAS was purchased by DAE, but they just operated under the DAE name now, right? Like the AWAS
Correct.
name went away, right?
Yeah, the AWAS name went away with the acquisition. Yeah.
Yeah.
AWAS was, I think it was principally kind of two portfolio transactions. The first one was a fairly sizable portfolio transaction that sold to Macquarie Air Finance, and then DAE came in and acquired the rest of the platform in portfolio.
Was the
Just DAE.
I may be mistaken, but was Bullion was that tied in any way to that or no? Am I thinking about something else?
Are you talking the organization or
there was a leasing company.
piles of gold?
No, not the piles of gold. No. But how
Bullion become part of SAIL? Or did Bullion become ACG? I don't think it became AWAS.
Okay. All right, then I must be mistaken there.
We can Wikipedia it. Now, AWAS was, it stood for ANSET Worldwide Aviation Services. So one of the few lessors that actually was created out of an airline. It was owned initially by ANSET and TNT in Australia, and using some excess aircraft that ANSET had. I think their first placement was actually 737-300s with America West.
But so you were talking about the conversion. The conversion is the wrong word. The unconversion, the
shift, the shift from
the shift from freighter to passenger on the 330 side. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. So Intrepid, the initial formation of Intrepid was in order for 20 factory A330 freighters. This was when Intrepid was based in Memphis, Tennessee. At that point, they had primarily been a leasing company, but more on the trading side. And again, freighter focused 727s, among some other assets. But they brought in a private equity sponsor. They placed this order with Airbus. It was for the factory freighter. So this is kind of based off of the A330 200 airframe, really, at the time.
These were all the chin-mounted 200, or the double chin 200 freighters, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, for a variety of reasons from timing and so forth, they just, after they brought in the private equity firm and where they were from a placement perspective, they decided to pivot that from the factory freighter side to converting those or those order positions into passenger aircraft.
So is that because obviously we've had Ron Anderson right on the show?
Right. Yeah. Right.
So is that kind of at the onset? Was he still part of that? So is that how you met him?
Yeah, I had an opportunity to work for Ron. Wonderful individual, really great mentor, in person. So that was early on.
Yeah, so it's we do these podcasts with a bunch of people. We're kind of famous now. It's our thing. But
including
a short
the
story. It's a living. Actually, it's not. It's not at all a living. But we have these conversations with people on the podcast. Now, we know you very well. But that Ron Anderson, that was my first time meeting Ron. I was on the podcast, and we met him in person. I don't know, Garrick, if you had known him before. Ron?
No, I met him because Brian introduced me to Ron, and was in Miami a few years back, at one of the Miami events. Yeah.
Met him in person at Austin at ISTAT a few years ago. I mean, he's almost like a caricature of himself, right? I mean, it's just like the nicest guy, just all smiles. His cheeks are always rosy because he's always smiling, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he and Jim Selberg, who's one of the partners in what he does today, Alpha Aviation Services, I think it's called. Jim was also part of the original Intrepid management team. So he's really built a loyal group of people around him as well. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So when did you leave Intrepid? Was it before COVID? It was, right? Because Intrepid was...
It was in 2018. So Intrepid, the evolution of Intrepid for the 6.5 years that I was there, it was an incredible learning experience. It definitely, went through a number of different iterations. But the ultimate plan was for it to IPO. That didn't happen. And then the private equity sponsors launched a sale process. Ultimately, what transacted was a disposition of the portfolio. They held on to the equity of the portfolio. They transitioned the management. So they wound down what was Intrepid, renamed it Voyager. And then Voyager was managed by Amadeo. And I left as part of that transition, which was mid-2018, and joined Alton Aviation Consultancy. In
19.
The fall of 2018.
Oh, 18. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And how long were you with Alton?
So I was with Alton for about 2 years. So when I joined John in the firm, it was still in very early days for them. They'd been around for a couple of years at that point. I want to say we were under 20 employees when I joined, and John and Adam and Leticia and the team, now they've built it up to over 50. So they've done an incredible job at scaling the business. But I was 2 years with them, primarily working on PE-backed engagements across a variety of investment opportunities in the aviation space, as well as just helping out on a variety of leasing projects, aircraft focused projects, business development, and so forth. Really enjoyed my time with John and the team there, and they've done, as I said, an exceptional job of building up that business.
We've only got 2 more stops, right? And then we're good.
2 more stops, my friend.
2 more stops.
So I did a quick turn out of the advisory world into the investment world, joining just pre-COVID or thinking I was joining, pre-COVID, and ultimately was right in the throes of COVID by the time I joined them. A small investment firm to help them focus and identify some aviation assets. I think given the timing, it was a combination of aviation and broader transportation investments, of things like container opportunities, really anything that's not bolted to the ground. Enjoyed that, but at the end of the day, really realized I was an aviation guy at heart. I had an opportunity after about 2 years with them to join Altavair as head of the Americas from a marketing perspective. So, I knew, Steve Rimmer and Matt Hosley for a while in the industry. and had an opportunity to join them running the North American marketing organization for them, and signed on to join them, but while still being working from my home, and really helping them build out the business in North America and otherwise. And so I've been with them for about 2.5 years now. And again, Altavair has gone through also an exceptional period of growth. The funds are backed by KKR. KKR's committed over $2 billion in equity to Altavair. We've got about 150 aircraft under management today. It's about $4.5 billion of assets under management. Roughly 50 professionals worldwide. Headquarters in Seattle, Dublin, London, and Singapore.
Yeah. So there's 50 professionals, and then there's you. So it's 51.
Right.
51.
Yeah.
50. Yeah.
15.
Somebody's got to be the odd man out.
Check me if I've got this right. American Express, AWAS, Intrepid, Alton, Alinda, Altavair.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a question for you.
The key is only to work for companies that start with A.
Yeah, apparently so.
That's what I was going to ask. Did they Intrepid. Misspell? Did Ron misspell? Is it really Intrepid?
Intrepid.
I mean, it did end up at the end of the day kind of Amadeo.
There you go.
There you go.
I mean, there is like a family lineage to it, not directly, but yeah. I mean, that's the the one outlier.
All right. So that begs the question: Amazon. What's next? There are only so many.
Yes.
Right?
There you go. All right, so I've got a real question, since Courtney can't take himself seriously enough. Yeah. So when you look at your background, right, it's pretty diverse in terms of, you've got airline experience, you've got kind of travel industry, through American Express, looking at obviously the airline stuff, but then you've got leasing, you've got consulting, you've got part of investment. So when you think about like kind of your role today, how has all that helped you to kind of better approach customers, better handle customers? Like, because obviously you're dealing with airlines today, but you're also, I'm sure, probably dealing with other lessors in some cases, right? So how does all of that work in your favor in terms of when you're telling other people, hey, if you're interested in the industry, like here's the stuff that I've done and here's how it's helped me. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, and if you can.
Yeah. Look, I think first of all, I have to say I'm from a career perspective, I'm completely blessed. I really am. The people that I've been able to learn from, I don't think I deserve. I've had amazing mentors and people that pay it forward, or that have paid it forward to help me in my career. To think about, I remember distinctly having a conversation with my mom, about my career plan, like when I was in high school, right? And to think about where I was then to where I am now, there's no straight line. And there's no way that this happens without people taking a personal interest in helping you along the way. And there's, too many names to list here, but, there's just so many people that I'm really grateful for in my life that have helped propel me to where I am. I think the combination of everything that's sort of built this foundation and how it helps me and it positions me is it just gives me a stronger sense of the business fundamentals, right? So I've been on the airline side, I've been on the leasing side, both from a risk and underwriting perspective, but now a marketing perspective. And so it's the proverbial, chef in the kitchen in some sense, where you know how the sausage is made, you see the different ingredients and how it all combines. And so I think that helps me because not all deals, and particularly in this day and age, you're not always going to have the lowest cost of capital or access to the newest aircraft. But if you can have really in-depth conversations with airlines, and I think become more of a resource to them, in also in building very strong relationships and foundations with your counterparts at the airlines, it will help position you ultimately for success in finding solutions, like really understanding what the airline is aiming for. What are they driving at? And being more of a listener than a talker. I think those are really big things. And like I say, having a long-term view, working with the airlines, to me, is one of the biggest positives, because not every campaign, not every RFP or deal is going to be the right one for you. But if you continue that dialogue, you continue that conversation, ultimately there will be something and there will be an opportunity. But it is a long-term gain and a long-term play in this industry, and definitely I think within North America.
From the airline's perspective, I mean, we tend to think of these type of transactions as kind of financial in nature, and they are, of course. But decision point on who wins that transaction, or when you're putting forward a deal to an airline, beyond the numbers, so discount rate, whatever the lease rate is, return conditions, whatever. What can move a deal forward beyond just your company's ability to make the lease more financially attractive to the airline?
Yeah, so it's a great question, Courtney. And
did you hear that, Gary?
Yeah, I heard it. Yeah.
Putting my airline.
Don't worry, I'll get a good one.
I think it's very much the ability to transact, the track record, right? Like, you can sign up a deal, but do you have the support internally to bring it forward, to bring it to a conclusion? Do you have the ability to fund it? Are there contingencies in there in terms of funding or having to go out and source debt? Or can you go out and underwrite it, fund it with equity, and back lever it at a later point, particularly if the airline is sensitive to closing in a shorter duration? I think that's where scale and size matter, who your sponsors matter, but it's also very much where the relationship matters, because your counterpart at the airline needs to be able to look at you and know, when they put pen to paper, that you're going to be able to deliver and follow through on what you've committed to follow through on. And it's a big vote for them, and it's a big deal for you. So being able to bring that forward, I think, really is a big aspect of it outside of just the economics.
What drives that relationship, I guess, beyond the person that you're transacting with?
Yeah, beyond the relationship. Look, part of it is have you been in the trenches with them before? I mean, you mentioned COVID. It could be COVID. It could have been, earlier times of either financial distress or just working with them through the cycles, and being more of a strategic partner than just have it be a bilateral commercial transaction. I think that's important. I think also, again, a little bit to who your sponsor is important, right? Like, they don't have to know me. They don't have to even like me. But if they know KKR is the equity behind us, I think that adds a lot of credibility, particularly at a board level, to have that. I think I'm also really grateful and lucky to have somebody like Steve Rimmer as CEO, and Matt Hosley and Frank O'Hagan. You've had Steve and Frank on the podcast before. They have relationships with C-level and board level executives. And so, one, if I need them, I know I can always lean on them to help support and place the call. But two, very often they'll have pre-existing relationships, just given they've been in the business longer. And people will automatically associate Altavair with Steve. And so if there's a question, they can call and they can lean on Steve. And so it may not always be that there's a bilateral discussion with the airline. It may be bilateral at my level, but at another level, there may be outreach to Steve or vice versa, to help make sure that those deals are secured or endorsed, or that they've got the comfort that they need to proceed with the approval.
When I think about, relationships is definitely something that keeps coming back, right? It's a recurring message, how important relationships are. But in an environment where, and obviously, kind of, I think we've proven things wrong. When you went through COVID, everybody was like, oh, you know what, we're just going to do Zoom meetings or Teams, or right, there's going to be less and less in person. It's going to take over. And I think, we've, as an industry, been pretty resilient to kind of go, no, we still believe in the in-person interaction and relationships and everything else. But do you think that over time, especially with everything, all the tools, everything else that's out there, does that get lost at all? Right? I mean, do you see that in some of the younger generations that, as you guys kind of bring people on, do they get it? Or is there something that's being lost a little bit?
Do they get it in terms of the importance of having that personal relationship, like in face?
Correct.
Face to face. Yeah.
I think Garrick's having an old man moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, always. Well, I have
these
lots
young
of those.
whippersnappers.
I always have. Well, no, because look, it seems like everybody's on their. You're always on. Everybody's on their phones.
You're always
everybody's
on the phone.
Kinda,
Yeah, right. That's what an old man would say.
Yeah. Well, I am an old man, especially since I'm the oldest of this group. But no, but it's true. Like you think about obviously the social media aspect of things and being kind of doing the messaging, but it's much less in person and more so through devices. Right. And so the younger generations that are coming up are in that environment. They're learning interaction through that. So as an employer of younger people that are coming through, and do you see any of that being lost, or is there a point where something clicks and they're like, oh, I get it. I know why I need to go travel. I need to go see these people.
Yeah. Look, I think if you're in this industry for the long term, it's going to come pretty quickly, the importance of having these personal relationships, right? It is a differentiator. And it's like I think the size of the deals and the transactions that you're working on, the ability to, just meet somebody and look them in the eyes, right? And also have them look you in the eyes. Like that is a really important part of developing business in aircraft leasing. So it is something, again, it may not be for everybody, but I think if you're committed to the industry long term, you're going to quickly find out that this is a requirement. And it's not just, hey, let me go visit an airline because there's an RFP out or there's a deal out. You can always do that, but it's really like, let me go visit an airline actually because there is no deal out, right? Let me go build that connection. Let me take them out for a meal or find out what their plans are for next year, what's on their mind. And just share perspectives. That's where you really, when you're putting it in the work, when there really isn't necessarily a near-term deal, that's when you're building the relationship.
Yeah. Which it's always.
We haven't done any deals on TikTok yet, Garrick.
No. I'm sure.
Or Snapchat. No.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sure LinkedIn is building that model of do you accept yes or no? Deals done. Transfer fees here.
Put that out as a survey. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd love to pivot a little bit. And so obviously you're well known as an av geek, right? That's something that's just out there, right? People call you that.
Thing or bad thing, but that's
right. I mean, it's definitely there's something and from what we've learned. I mean, you're an incredible, wealth of knowledge and from the industry and a great source of information, right? So from that standpoint, like obviously you've got a great ability to reach out, look for information, you use different tools. And so in terms of when you think about how you do your job today and you think about where to go and try to grab information or get, understand the industry, sorry, it's a long-winded question, but I feel like there is an unbelievable amount of information and data that's out there these days. Yeah. So how do you filter through that to ultimately determine, what's important, what's going to help you do your job, what's going to help you understand what's happening? What are some of the things that you look for? Because and obviously because you're anybody that needs anything, if you come to you, you typically have an answer, right? So I think you're a great person to ask that question. Yeah,
it's a great question, Garrick.
Nice.
Yes. Got one too.
All right, I'm done.
It's 1-1, baby. It's on.
It's a competition, you got the dartboard. Yeah. Look, I think it's a couple of things. To be an effective marketer, part of it is it's not always going to be in what you read, right, or in the data, right? A big part of being successful is having conversations, picking up the phone, getting on an airplane. It's something I spend by far the most amount of my time doing in any day, is just connecting with people and really trying to look for those relationship angles of, can I help you today? Is there something out there? Is there something, I should be focused on or you're focused on? Because what you don't want as a marketer is really surprises. Stuff to come up, stuff gets announced, you miss something. However unlikely that may be, that's obviously not an ideal outcome. In terms of, to your point of like what's out there in the news, in the data world, one, I get this great data feed by this guy that publishes visualapproach.io. Don't know if you've ever read his analysis.
Never heard of him.
Never heard of him. There's some chick that's doing it, though. She's killing it.
Yep, killing it. It's great. I wish they would come out and speak more. No, I really respect what Courtney's done in terms of some of the ideas he's put out there. I think those are really good thought leaders. I think in terms of the news, there's probably nothing that I read that others either don't read or know of already. But to me, it's not like necessarily what the headline says, but it's always answering the so what. We have a lot of data in this industry. Generally, airlines produce a lot of data. There's a lot of what I like to call data exhaust that's also kicked off by this industry. And it's not just, hey, here's the headline.
Exhaust as in stuff shooting out the back, not exhaustion. Is that what you mean?
Correct.
Got
yes.
it. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Shooting out the back.
Yeah.
So it's not just like, hey, here's an article or here's a data point, but here's what it could mean, or here's an idea or an observation, or maybe putting two and two together beyond what it says is like, here's a potential angle for us in a transaction. And being able to turn some of these ideas, as random as they may be from time to time, into discussions with the airlines is like, hey, we read this, obviously you're kind of in this situation or thinking about X, Y, and Z. Like, how can we help pivot that discussion into something else, or something that might be helpful to you, or that we might think is helpful to you? And it may go nowhere, but at least one, the airline knows that you're thinking a bit more strategically than just what's going out on a RFP basis. And you're just putting ideas forward to the business to noodle on.
I can't tell you how many times I've heard from various marketing guys at lessors. And by marketing, we give the title marketing and leasing to the sales guy. I mean, who we would call a sales guy in other in other industries. But I've heard so many times from marketing guys in leasing, well, we can't compete. We don't have the lowest cost of funds. I remember kind of thinking like, well, not with that attitude, you can't. But it's true. Sometimes that's born of them having had the lowest cost of funds at some point. And this isn't just a leasing lesson. This is more just an overall kind of business lesson I think I've picked up a little bit, which is the best sales guys tend to follow the worst products. Like, if you want the best sales guy, not necessarily the ones that don't sell, but the ones that can actually create that value sell. How many times do we hear that the deal sells itself? Great. Then what do I need you for? Right. So the idea of having the lowest cost of capital, that's the default. Status quo is you should win everything. Yeah. What are you doing to add value beyond that? Because it's purely a commodity at that point.
Yeah, that's one element of it. I think when you're when you're benchmarking against the quote unquote, lowest cost of capital, they're also probably focused on a certain asset, generally, shiny and new. Could be sell and lease back, for stuff that's delivering. It could be a better credit quality. I think the one thing I've noticed is the industry's matured over time and you have more players. The distinction in cost of capital, or the separation of what people are looking for, has become, it's crystallized more. So there are people that will compete very successfully in that, Courtney, of the lowest cost of capital, and be very successful in that. And then there's buckets of capital that are backing leasing firms or servicers or platforms that don't have the lowest cost of capital, know they don't have the lowest cost of capital, and really won't chase that because they know that's not where it's going to deliver the value for them or for the airline, right? So it may be more midlife. It may be more end of life. It could be in conversions. It really just depends on, one, what your equity bucket is, right? What their returns are, how you view how long you're going to hold an asset for in a lease, how do you view residual values, right? And disposition strategy, and ultimately how you're going to monetize that asset or investment for the sponsors of the business.
Do you believe that airlines are better buyers of aircraft, lessees of aircraft today than in years past?
I don't want to speak for airlines. I think the airlines have always been, by and large, very good buyers of aircraft. And I think, if you go historically, right, like leasing companies doing forward orders was not something that was always a given, right? I mean, there have been a subset of lessors that have specialized in that. Airlines have been very good buyers of aircraft because that's been their specialization, right? And they go out, they know exactly what they're looking for. Generally, they're buying significant number of aircraft, particularly North American Airlines, and working with the OEMs on that. I think lessors have gotten really good at that as well. And, some lessors have effectively, that's their de facto strategy, right? They are OEM orders, lessors, and then they go and they place them. The differentiation from an OEM side is that, if I'm selling X number of aircraft to an airline, I have to build it to one spec, right? It's going to be cookie cutter. And, I'm managing a individual relationship. If I'm selling aircraft to a leasing company, I know that they're unlikely to place all those aircraft, or virtually unlikely to place all of those aircraft with one airline. So I'm going to be dealing with multiple specifications that I'm going to be building to, possibly multiple engine types, and dealing with, a different set of customers to spec these airplanes to, right? So it's not that one is better than the other, but I think the dynamic of how they're placed, who you're dealing with, how you're configuring the airplanes is definitely different.
There was a time at which, I remember hearing that the lessors are the smartest buyers in the room by and large, and the airlines are kind of along for the ride. This is years ago, right? Mm-hmm. So the airlines have caught up. It feels, right? They've improved. There's more process in the buying process, as it were. There's more systematic, do this, not that. There's far fewer, I'll take 114 airplanes. Why 114? Because my birthday is on January 14th, right? That happened. Yeah. A lot less of that, more kind of objective, empirical buying. Yep. But have, as a space, not you, but as a space, have the lessors kept up with that? Have they... Are the lessors still the more sophisticated in that kind of context, or is it pretty well evened out?
It's a very broad question to answer to. I think by and large, you would say that it's evened out because I think, one, airlines, to your point, Courtney, I think they're they've become even more sophisticated than they were in terms of what they're buying and how they're buying. The airline industry has certainly, I think, on a number of fronts, figured out a way to, become profitable and less cyclical. That's not always the case, but, by and large, buying aircraft and how they finance those airplanes definitely plays into that. Equally, lessors, have built up scale over time, right? The industry, the leasing industry itself has matured, again, a little bit to the equity behind the lessors, right? So not all lessors are going to go place forward orders with Boeing and Airbus. Not all lessors are positioned to do that, right? If you've got private equity money, they might not value the drag between placing an order now and when you're going to take delivery of an airplane, right? So they've been smarter about how they place orders for aircraft, when those aircraft deliver, right? How and when they're going to place those airplanes. So I do think, overall, both sides are incredibly smart and also, equal, I think, in terms of where they're coming at, and does it make sense for both of them respectively on how they're going about placing those aircraft.
It's a good answer to an unfair question.
It's an interesting question.
When I think about, kind of looking at, again, your background, I think you've been in the leasing world now for probably over 10 years, right? I think, right?
Yeah.
So I guess, one question, two parts in terms of during that time, have you seen any significant changes in terms of how people look at the business or how people kind of stay successful or become successful in that business? Do you think that there will be further changes as time progresses, right? Because we're obviously in an environment where it's highly competitive, pricing's, it's on certain deals, maybe not as attractive, or, there's obviously a lot of things that are going on that make you wonder, does the model need to change? Or, I don't know, it'd be kind of interesting to get your take on what you think has changed over the last 10, 15 years, and if there is additional change that may be coming to basically kind of deal with the current environment that we're seeing today that's probably going to last for a while.
Yeah.
Tell the future, Brian.
I think, exactly. Let me get my magic 8-ball. So change is a constant, right? I mean, the industry has absolutely changed from when I entered in 2007, 2008 to where we are today. I think, it's definitely matured in that time period. We've spoken a bit about consolidation, right? M&A, I think, has been a big driver of some of that maturity, of just removing some lessors that had, were looking for an exit, bringing in different types of capital into the industry that didn't exist before. I think back to when I joined, I think, there were some of the major lessors and financial institutions that were involved, along with private equity firms. But I think now what you're getting is, PE firms that are more focused on a specific investment thesis. So not just a cycle of here's supply and demand, or here's kind of the proverbial 50% of aircraft are leased and 50% are owned or financed by airlines, but here's where we see an opportunity within either a certain asset class, asset type, or space, or age profile. And so I think you're starting to see new entrants that are bringing, a bit more direction and thesis around a specific objective or specific outcome and an asset strategy. And I think that's going to continue. Right. I don't see that changing. And I think that's a sign of just how the industry has matured. And obviously with M&A, you've seen, some lessors get bigger and some of those management teams that have exited have started other lessors. And so that's just part of the natural evolution of the industry. What I think, Garrick, to your question of being successful or staying successful, I think what that means in this industry is also kind of knowing where your sweet spot is, right? And really making sure like that the capital you have is aligned with the strategy that you're going out to achieve. Because you've seen some investors and some investments come in and it's been a very short ride for them, right? They've been able to sell aircraft down or sell portfolios down in a very short period of time. And I think, when you're going through the process of setting up a platform and recruiting a platform and building a team, you really do kind of want that longer term thesis to it. The aircraft have long economic lives. And if you match, either that particular bucket of capital, or if you've got different strategies targeting these different life cycles of an asset, this can be a really nice long-term horizon business that you build. So while, the broader business and the broader industry has grown, I think that the success factor is really a bit more nuanced in terms of where your capital sits vis-a-vis the assets that you're targeting.
So over this period of time, we've seen really the rise of lessors, right? Like aircraft leasing is not necessary. It's certainly not an old business at this scale.
Yeah.
The maturity of the industry, I think, was the term that was used, which I think is very appropriate. We've also seen the rise and the creation of the ABS, the EETC, right? These are all post, maybe not the EETC, but close enough, kind of post 9/11, the last 20 years, these constructs. And how, and even that, we've got, we've got the JOLCOs and the Chinese lessors and just how that just is a very different dynamic in the market. We've gone through an intense amount of change. And we talk about this in other industries. We like to talk about this in aviation. But truly, the change that we've seen in the leasing space, like let's use the OEMs, for example. The change we've seen in the OEMs is massive. I think it still pales in comparison to just the change in the overall business model and evolution that the lessors are going through. So we've gone through traditional operating leasing, financial leases, WTCs, ABSs, which WTCs are not leasing, but just different, JOLCOs, all the different types, getting into maintenance reserves and then the challenges during COVID. What's still changing? Or maybe the better question is what's coming? Is it more change? Is it more structures? Is it more kind of new thinking and new ways of approaching it? Or is it a maturity of the market in itself? Almost like we talk about consolidation, but we don't really ever talk about what that means. It's almost like a slowing down of these new types of structures. What, now that you've sat in it for, how long did you say, Garrick? Oh yeah, forever. Like, how do you see what's next macro wise from the way we pay for airplanes?
Yeah, look, one, as I said before, right? Change is a constant. And if you're not changing and constantly reassessing, standing still is in itself a strategy, but not a good one. I think the overall maturity of the business, Courtney, is what you're going to see, or of the industry. Yeah, there may be new products. Investment bankers and capital markets guys are very smart in trying to put together structures that will match, what investors are looking for from a return profile perspective. But I think more than that, like, just look at where we are, even as an industry, in terms of developing human capital to support the business, right? You now have UCD, right, that has a master's in aviation finance. Embry-Riddle has also a master's in aviation finance. You've got ISTAT-U. We have this whole industry that's kind of developed in the recent past that's now supporting young professionals coming either out of college or after a few years of work experience, and being able to develop them to successfully enter aircraft leasing, be it in Ireland or other geographies. That, I think, is a tremendous one stamp of approval, but also shows you like this is a real industry, right? This isn't just guys that, av geeks like myself that happen to know aviation, right? Or airplanes or more informal, you hear the days about ISTAT when it started, right? Was it like 30 or 40 people that showed up to the first conference? I mean, this is a really big industry. You go to Dublin in January, as you guys know well, right? I mean, it almost kind of takes over the city in itself. So I think it is very much just a maturation of the industry and in the business. And along with that, yeah, we've seen, to your point, different products come out and leasing companies that are really focused on these different products, right? There are leasing companies that are really targeting the JOL market, as you say, right? There are lessors that are very focused on ABS issuances. And that's kind of their track record in being able to show their investors that these are liquid investments. And so I think you'll continue to see that. But the long-term outlook for the industry is really good, and it maturing in itself, I think, is a really positive thing.
Okay, before Garrick chimes in with a great question, I don't want to give you a chance to tell me it's a great question, but I have a follow-on.
Yes, another great question.
Thank you. It's not even, see, he's conditioned, Garrick.
Just
yeah. Okay, last time we're going to have him on. Sorry.
I think you're uniquely positioned to answer this question. It's not one that I really thought about until you were just kind of talking through kind of the products in different ways. But in aviation, we tend to be aviation people first.
Yeah.
And then what we do in aviation second. So aviation finance, right? But you're kind of in a unique position to have seen other parts of kind of that investing and leasing space where these products may have been built out before, or different structures built out before. What other spaces other than aviation are interesting to you, or do you follow just for perspective and insight on ways, either from a product, a new structure that you might offer, or just to keep up with because you think that there's some overlap between aviation and this?
Yeah. So look, I mean, the industries that I follow kind of closely follow what I talked to you about earlier in terms of my overall interests. I don't know that it necessarily tracks equal to what we see, although the financial products are not dissimilar. I still very much follow the restaurant industry, and the hotel/resort industry and developments. And I think there are a lot of parallels, right? I mean, both are active in there's ABS transactions, right? And it can be everything from like timeshare resorts, right? You can have whole business securitizations, TGI Fridays, which recently filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. They had done like this whole business securitization a few years ago. So those industries have similar, right? It's capital intensive day one, but then it's kind of like should be, if the business performs, dividend flow long term, then you have a residual at the end. And then also the B2B data/information services, which is kind of a whole different enchilada in terms of how they finance themselves. But I find it, really interesting industry. You have big publicly traded companies like Informa, Relics, and some others, as well as private equity owned businesses. You've got others that are like B2B business data like ZoomInfo that went from PE sponsored businesses. I think they did 2 or 3 rounds of PE sponsorship. Ultimately, they did an IPO and are publicly traded today. So Dun & Bradstreet is another one. So there's a lot of those businesses as well. But they don't follow the exact path that you would see in aviation. Where you're going to see more parallels to aviation is going to be really anything that, has a kind of a day one higher capital cost, this kind of dividend flow of revenue or stream of revenue, and then a residual at the end. And there's conferences, right? It's like what used to be ABS West and ABS East in the US and Las Vegas and Miami. I mean, aviation is like a very small part of that, right? You have everything from like solar panels to timeshares that we talked about, credit card receivables. There's all these other industries that are very much reliant on these capital markets products.
I mean, you have basically real estate. Like I think of aircraft as real estate with no location or all the locations, whichever way you look at it. Very capital intensive, but there's this interesting element as well, which is a very fixed cost, high capital intensive portion, but also a very high depreciation. So I'm thinking engines and maintenance time and green time and those type of things.
Yeah.
Shipping like 18-wheeler
right.
leasing, or is there anything that's kind of similar in that range?
No, of course. Look, it draws back to my time when I was in the investment world at Alinda, right? Shipping, absolutely. Shipping containers. You have different ones. You've got like dry box, you've got refrigerated, reefer containers, different sizes, the standard 40-foot, 20-foot. And you're not buying, although they're lower ticket size, right? You're generally not going to the manufacturer and buying one or two. You're buying 10,000 of them, right? At one time. Different economic lives, right? With the depreciation, as you say, and different counterparties, different counterparty credit quality. It can be things like portable generators, right? These are big industrial generators, but that are not bolted to the ground, that can be used in everything from natural disasters to powering hospitals. They can be used in shipping ports. There's a lot of different use cases for those. Search and rescue helicopters, EMS helicopters would be another one. Oil and gas helicopters, similarly. So there are a lot of industries that very much track close to aviation in that regard. Yeah.
All right. So is it my turn to ask a great question? And then unfortunately we're going to have to wrap it up. But
no, it's not. It's not your turn.
It's not my turn? Okay.
We'll continue, Garrick, by the time. If you want to leave, it's okay.
You're more than happy. I mean, it might be a better discussion. No, so I'm.
It's not true.
As you're kind of talking about, some of the ways the industry is changing and everything else, and as you mentioned, right, obviously aircraft are long-term assets, right? These are assets that are flying for 20, 25 years, 30 years, 40 years in some cases, sometimes more, right? Yeah. So it's not like they're 5-10-year assets. Yet it seems like, in the leasing business, there seems to be, as part of the model, right, there needs to be that turnover, which is typically, 5-7 years. It feels like, especially with newer airplanes, right? Mm-hmm. So do you think...
When you say turnover, are you talking about like trading?
Yes, trading, meaning like trading out of the asset, before the initial lease ends, right? It seems to be kind of like you've run the depreciation course, time to move it. And so obviously, the cyclicality of the business will matter in terms of where we are, but still, it seems like it's a general rule of thumb, like, over as a decent sized portfolio, right? You try to trade out of the asset at some point, not kind of holding it on for 20, 25 years, right? But, I'm wondering, is there, as we look at kind of the current environment that we're in, where you've got, OEM challenges, you've got, like obviously right now we're in aircraft shortages, right? There's definitely a different mindset of, how long do we keep certain assets? Airlines are looking at keeping assets a little bit longer. Now, maybe that shifts down the road if there's another event, but at least the mindset right now is, hey, let's hold things on, and the useful lives of these airplanes from a financial tool or from a financial aspect is longer, right? So do you think that will change potentially the leasing view of how do we manage these assets longer better, right? Through expertise, through the technical understanding, so that way we don't necessarily feel like we have to part with these assets at a certain period of time, because then if we hold them on much longer, right, there's a chance that we'll have to take a loss, right? And that was, if I remember my CIT days, right, the idea was if you hold on to the asset through its first lease, you'll probably lose money because you will have gone through a downturn.
Yeah.
Right. So is that, how, I don't know if that's like, is that something that maybe others are looking at or should be looking at?
So I think, well, two things come to mind is one, why do lessors look to trade out in that time frame, right? A little bit to what you were talking about is, are you going through a downturn? But it could be for a variety of other reasons, right? It could be from managing counterparty exposure. Let's say they went in and they did a big sale and leaseback with an airline. They don't want to hold all of that exposure for the duration of the leases. It could be to show liquidity to their sponsors, right? That these are tradable assets, that the underwrite that they've provided actually holds true. It could be from a fund timing perspective, or just a general kind of average age. And or there may be interest, right? There could be lessors that are really excited about that asset, might take a different view, or credit counterparty and really want to grow that exposure. So I think there's probably not just one answer to why somebody's going, for that sale or trade opportunity per se. I think the second part of that, though, Garrick, is where we find ourselves today, which is, you're unable to really take delivery of all the aircraft that the OEMs have committed to, right, to deliver. And thus leases have gotten extended, and lessors, because they can't or aren't taking delivery of aircraft either directly from the OEM or sale and lease back from the airlines because the airlines aren't getting the deliveries on time, are holding onto aircraft longer. And so does that change the model for them, right? Are they getting more comfortable having assets in their portfolio for longer periods of time? Is because they've been able to extend aircraft at rents that make sense. Are they willing to invest in, having the technical team manage those aircraft later into their economic lives, or in the marketing team to remarket aircraft? Not all leasing companies are necessarily set up or want to be in the business of remarketing assets, right? They want to do that first level origination. If you're going to extend airplanes and then take them off lease and transition them to another operator, that's a different skill set from a marketing standpoint, from a technical standpoint, and also a legal standpoint. So I think you might see lessors that now see that opportunity crystallize, where maybe in the past they would have followed the standard playbook of just kind of rinse and repeat, right? Sell it, reinvest those dollars into a new deal. And maybe that's changed a little bit as a result.
So you listed, I thought was a very good and exhaustive list of reasons why a lessor may be looking to trade out, but I'm not going to let you off the hook.
Yeah.
What percentage of each? Give me to the second decimal point. What percentage, like what's the leading right now? Is it, this is just the term that the equity was comfortable being and it's time to exit? Is it risk management, just profile, making sure you have the right diversity in the fund split? Does that drive more trading? Give me a priority list or kind of a top down list, top 5 reasons that you think, what is driving the trading today primarily?
Yeah. Look, I think you have to start at the macro point, right? Which is just there is demand for aircraft, right? And because lessors can't get that necessarily from the traditional either OEM origination or sale and leaseback channels, there's interest in acquiring aircraft, either individually or in portfolios. You're seeing that in M&A. Look at Voyager went through a sale process. NAC is in a sale process. Aquila was just recently traded. And there's, but by no way is that list exhaustive, right? There's a lot of lessors that are either openly in a process, in a sales process, or privately, or the portfolios are. So I think it's a good time to sell, right? Values are high. There's a demand. People want them and are willing to pay, and in some cases pay a premium for them. So if you're a financial investor and, opportunistic, like you can go to market with either individually aircraft or a portfolio, and I think make a nice return. So I think in that it's macro, but it stretches above, I think, the other factors, because anything else, like if the macro market isn't there, you may not be able to sell that airplane, right? If it's a weaker credit or weaker jurisdiction, interest rates are even higher, or the fundamentals don't support it. Like, you want to be there when the market is there and the market is supportive. I think everything else follows, right? And Courtney, point taken in terms of kind of what the priority list is, but I think that priority list for one lessor could be something completely different than it is for another lessor.
Priority is the wrong word.
Yeah.
Most common, I think, is more like today, because obviously it would change, right? So today, and I don't know, it sounds legit. I don't know, Brian said it, so it must be true. That it's more macro. I mean, it makes sense, right? I mean, you're looking at an investment deal that if you bought in before, suddenly the present value of this is worth more sold than the cash flows forward, reinvest the money, make even more, right? I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But if you're over concentrated on a particular name in your portfolio, right, that could be a big driver, particularly if that airline's doing well right now. Again, it could be a very good opportunity to sell.
Yeah. Well, guys, I hate to cut us short, but I do have to go. So I did want to take this time to thank Brian for obviously talking to us. Like, we're and I'll speak for Courtney as well, but we're grateful for your friendship and for your ability and willingness to always share your thoughts, share your information, whatever it is, right? You're always there, so it was actually, it was really fun to be able to kind of have this conversation with you today. I'm sorry it took us a little bit of time to get there, but we finally got you in. So, but I did want to thank you. This was great, right? It's phenomenal, and we could talk for another 2 hours without stopping. But it was definitely fun to chat with you. So thanks for doing this.
No, thank you. Look, I'm blessed beyond measure to have great friends like you. I don't deserve you guys. It's great to have the conversation. Love being here and really value the opportunity to come join the pod.
Cool.
Thank you, Brian. All right, are you ready, everybody? We're back. Kinda.
Yeah. We're back. That's right. In case you had noticed, it's been a while.
You're gonna have to edit this. When did I join?
I'm not editing anything.
2.5 years ago.
The floundering is part of the show.
Good. Thank you. Good.